We are recording.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to this AIM Center webinar on personalizing the writing experience. We're so happy that you're joining us this afternoon. We really appreciate your time. Just a few housekeeping details before we get started with the content. This webinar is being closed captioned, and the way to access the closed captions is to look for that button in your Zoom interface. It usually has a CC symbol on it. And those captions will appear along the bottom of the screen. And a big thank you to Brooke from ACS Captions, who's providing the captioning support for us this afternoon. Really appreciate that, Brooke. We really look to you as well to contribute your expertise and your insights in the chat. So we'll be using the chat to interact with each other and for you to interact with us this afternoon. So if you have any questions at any time, go ahead and post those to the chat. Now, here's a little tip. You want to make sure that you use the drop-down menu in Zoom and you choose all panelists and attendees. And that will make sure that everyone in the chat can see your message. Otherwise, you may be engaging in a private conversation with someone and the rest of the room won't be able to see what you're posting. And we'll miss your brilliant thoughts if that happens. So we want to make sure you choose all panelists and attendees. And we also invite you to share out with the rest of the world using Twitter. We are on Twitter. Our handle is @cast_UDL. And we encourage you to use a hashtag AEM, the number 4, and then ALL, AIM for all. So that way we can see the message. And throughout the webinar, Leslie is going to be posting a number of links and other resources. That's Leslie O'Callahan, who helps us out with these webinars. And you've probably seen her in the chat on previous webinars as well. And one final reminder that, again, this is being recorded. The recording is typically made available about a week after the webinar. That gives us time to have the recording closed caption. And you will find it on the same page where you registered for this webinar. And Leslie will drop the link for that page. It will have the recording from the webinar along with a handout and the slides if you want to review the content in that way. So not only the recording, but related resources to help you get the most out of that information. All right, so I am Luis Perez. I'm a technical assistant specialist with the National AIM Center. The AIM Center is based at CAST, where the Universal Design for Learning principles were developed and continue to be undergoing continuous improvement and development. And today I'm really pleased to be joined by a colleague at CAST, Tracy Hall. So Tracy, you want to go ahead and say hello and introduce yourself?
Well, good afternoon. Yes, my name is Tracy Hall and I'm at CAST. I've been there for more years than I'd like to say, but about 20. And I'm a research scientist and instructional designer there. I work mostly in the research and development portion of CAST, but I love doing the professional learning. And I just want to thank Luis and everyone from the AIM Center for inviting me to speak with you today. I'm looking forward to our conversation.
And we're so excited to have you contribute your knowledge, your extensive knowledge and expertise, Tracy. So let's just go over a couple of goals for this webinar. And then I also invite you to set your own intention for what you want to get out of the webinar. So our goals is to share with you some of the latest research on writing from CAST, and Tracy's going to highlight one of the tools that's under development at CAST. And as we discuss that tool, we're also going to talk about some insights around the implementation of universal design for learning to support writing and writing instruction. And then we're going to look at some readily available tools for removing barriers at each stage of the writing process. So if we think about writing as a process, there are different stages, and barriers at any of those stages can prevent learners from being successful in the writing, the achievement of writing. So if you are comfortable, go ahead and share in the chat what your intentions are for this webinar, and I'll give you a second to do that. And then right after that, we will really get started with the rest of the content. And if you don't feel comfortable, you can just write that out for yourself. but just set your intention. You could write it on a Post-it note, write it on a piece of paper. And then at the end of the webinar, we'll have time for some Q&A, but you can bring up those goals again and remind us if there's anything else that we missed or didn't get a chance to cover. We will make sure that we have time for that. All right, so Tracy, I'm going to turn it over to you and just let me know when to advance the slides.
Can do. Thank you, Luis. Boy, I see a lot of great questions coming in from lots of folks about what they want to learn today. Don't hesitate to remind us if we may forget. I think Leslie will help us as well. So this first diagram is just basically something that we all want to acknowledge, that writing is a complex thing for everyone to do. And it's a very interrelated and iterative challenge as we work through things. So we always kind of think of writing development, always becoming better in our writing, as sort of the center of our work and what we want to do with it. And if you look at those bubbles around that circle, you can see that there's a whole lot that is a component of that writing development. There's feedback that we get from peers, from parents, from teachers, and so forth. There's the creativity that everyone brings to the writing table. There's also the social and collaborative part of writing, and that is that we are influenced by our peers and our interactions and our whether they be formal or informal. It is an interactive design process, and there's not one specific order to this, so you can see I'm kind of jumping around this circle, but a very interactive design process. And so that interaction is what can help us to improve those skills that we're developing in writing. And then certainly there are some basic skills that we need to have. There is also background knowledge that we bring to the table. And then something that's very important that I think we all need to be considering is that issue of engagement. So the goal that we kind of have today is to think of these sorts of complex and iterative, interrelated challenges that we have in writing and look at it from the perspective of universal design for learning. And that's kind of what we've done in a project that we've had going for a number of years here at CAST, in creating a tool to support writers at the middle school level. We are hopeful in our future to make this applicable to other age levels as well, but we wanted to kind of focus to begin with so that we're working in specific content standard areas, and then we can broaden it out when we see those things that are impacting and supporting writing the most. So we created a little tool, and Luis, yes, I didn't even need to say next slide. He just read my mind. So the name of our tool is Writer's Key, and we've tried to make it fun and engaging. Each time a learner tunes into the tool, a different little character might pop up on the screen. You see a little frog sort of sliding in. Those characters that slide in are characters that students actually suggested that we create. So again, a form of engagement to get students kind of going. What's going to pop up today? There's a cupcake, there's a shark, all sorts of things. But basically what we'd like to show you is that this tool has been based in its development on the principles of universal design for learning and the process of writing. So we've really brought that evidence-based practice in with universal design for learning to create this tool that we call Writer's Key. And it's a key to help writing. So if we can move on, I'll give you a big overview. Yeah,
so Tracy, before we move on, I just want to make sure everybody understands what universal design for learning is, just in case you don't have that background knowledge. So could you give us like the elevator pitch?
I bet you're better at that than I, Luis. Universal design for learning is a framework that was created at CAST, and it's based on 3 principles: multiple means of engagement, multiple means of action and expression, and multiple means of representation. And really what we're working on is realization that every learner has their own variability, and everything that they bring to the table is unique to them. There are commonalities, but there are also differences. And what we want to do is to provide tools, to provide ways in which we can provide access and good learning practices for all the learners that come to the table.
And that is, I couldn't have said it better myself, Tracy. So that's definitely the key, is that we're all on a spectrum when it comes to our engagement, our ability to take in information, and our ability to express ourselves. And so designing environments that provide that flexibility really helps to address that variability. So that's really key to universal design for learning, is busting barriers to learning. And Leslie went ahead and just shared, there's a page on the CAST website that has additional information on what UDL is, but I just want to make sure everybody had a good context before we discuss Writer's Key.
Thank you, Luis. That was oversight on my part. I apologize.
No, not at all. No problem.
All right, so the name of the tool is Writer's Key, and what I'd like to do in this slide is to kind of show you that there are some major component parts to the tool. The major piece is that center diagram that you see that we call the compose area, and this is where we actually apply and support students in using the writing process, and I'll explain how that process works and then how we apply the principles of UDL to support accessibility and scaffolding for all learners. We also have an area that we call the playground. You see that up in the upper left-hand corner. The playground is basically an area where we've put together a series of activities, and these activities are to help build writing skills as component parts. So for example, one of our playground activity areas is writing a thesis statement. Another playground activity area is summarizing. These are skills that are part of our overall writing, especially when it comes to larger pieces of writing, and they can be really challenging for some students. So rather than working on all parts of a writing essay at once, we're kind of helping to focus on component parts. And these are places where students can practice working on those component parts. Another area is feedback. This is an area of the tool that we are really proud of. We're really very pleased with the outcomes from this. This is a place in which not only teachers may provide written or oral feedback to students, but students can request and obtain feedback from peers. And peer-to-peer feedback, there's a lot of research supporting that. And we really found that supportive in some research that we've done as well. So I'll share some information about feedback, and I know Luis has some to share as well. So now we'll dig a little bit more into the tool. One of the areas that I wanted to share with you is that in that compose space, that larger space from the last slide, we have taken the structure of process writing and broken it down into component parts. And so students are working on a component part rather than the entire essay all at one time. We're trying to help take away some of that overwhelmingness of everything that it is that you need to do. And although it looks as that all of this work is very linear, students can pop in and out of places where they want to and move throughout the tool in a way that helps them. What I wanted to share with you in this page, which is called the Develop Thesis Statement page, is that when students receive an assignment, there are also the thesis that they need to write around that assignment. And so we've provided some guiding questions to help people think about how to write that particular component of an essay. We've actually provided a space too, where if they respond to questions to help that guiding process, that they can click a button and that goes right into the thesis text area versus having to copy and paste or rewrite it again. We found, and you probably know this from working with students, that redundancy of writing again and again can be very challenging and lower their engagement. And so we wanted to help make those movements of text that they've created easy. So there are several pages within the tool. We are on the second of these 5 pages. And just to kind of give you an indication of some of the things that are available. The navigation for students is in a couple of places, again, for that variability and having multiple options for what students do. Those are, again, based on those UDL guidelines. Why don't we move on to the next page, Luis, and I'll share with you another feature that's available for students. You may have seen on the last page a little button called Knowledge Cards. And what we've done is for each of those pages that students are working in, provided these cards specific to the style of writing that the students might be working in, whether it's informational or narrative or argumentative. And those are the 3 big areas in middle school writing that students spend their time writing in. Students can access these information cards that simply tell them the who, or the what, the why, and the how of how to do that particular skill, whether it's writing a summary or providing evidence or writing a thesis statement. So these are available on demand. Students can pop them up. And the images that you see on the right-hand side of each of those colorful little cards is a video. So these are completely accessible for students, but they also provide examples for that what, why, and how that they can read about on the left-hand side. So I think this is a good place to kind of stop and allow you guys to ask questions of myself or of Luis in terms of what we've said so far regarding universal design for learning and this tool that's helping us to illustrate ways in which UDL can be applied to writing. There is a question from Joy in the chat. Can we access Writer's Key as an individual? It says self-help if we're not a school district. Joey, you've really prompted me to remember to say something to everyone and to let you know that this is a prototype tool at this point. This is how CAS kind of develops things to see if they're actually working. We're at a prototype stage where we're doing research on this tool. Our goal is to make this available for everyone. But at this point, it's still at that prototype level because we haven't gotten a completion on everything that we want to have in this tool, and that proof of concept is a component that we're still playing with. So let me put you on the spot, Tracy, in terms of one or two sort of big takeaways from the work you've done so far of how UDL informs the writing process. What would you share if people were looking for, you know, similar tools or trying to support learners? What would be those one or two sort of takeaways from the work you've done in developing these tools? So one of the things that we've really found to help that engagement level with students, certainly having supports and so forth behind it, but that engagement seems to be a huge, big starter for students, is to provide students with options of what to write about. When we were looking at those playground activity, or I was talking about the playground activity kinds of things, the students had options of what topic area they wanted to work in. We selected topic areas by working with students to find out what they would want to be interested in or what they were interested in. Sports came up. Art came up, right? Some high interest levels at the middle school for topic areas. So we coordinated all of those activities around those topic areas to, again, build that engagement. Writing can be very challenging for many of us. And so if there is that issue around the challenge of writing and an issue around the interest of what it is you're being asked to write about, that lowers the capability, the interest, the engagement of the student to even get involved in the task. So what we're really trying to do is help to build that engagement. The other thing that we have certainly found is a lot of the features that I'll be sharing a little bit in relation to the accessibility and supports for students. You saw a little bit in relation to supports with those guiding questions that were on that thesis statement page. Taking that process and breaking it down into its component parts. So if you take an entire essay and break it down into component parts, you've got, you know, what am I going to write about? The thesis statement, getting all those materials together and organizing all those materials, drafting it, revising it, and polishing and publishing it, right? Even in those stages that I mentioned, we've taken it and broken it down into component parts from there. So it's short, small steps for students to be able to take and move forward, and that has been very helpful for us. That is not something that can only be a part of a tool. That is certainly something that we can do offline or in other tools besides Writer's Key. Yeah, I think it's really important to recognize that writing definitely has some significant executive functioning requirements. So having to do with planning and organizing, and we have to account for that. Learners may be at different stages in terms of their executive functioning. And so breaking it down, breaking the process down into more manageable chunks is definitely very helpful. So related to some of the supports that Tracy just mentioned, that's what the next segment is going to focus on. And so I'm going to share with you some ideas for tools that are available to support learners at different stages of the writing process. And then it's going to be a conversation between me and Tracy. Tracy's going to share how some of these ideas have been implemented in Writer's Key. So here we go. So again, just to reinforce that writing is a process and there's different ways to think about it. This is just one way. You saw that it was, you know, we use different terms in Writer's Key, but in general, the stages are pre-writing. So this is where you're researching the topic. You may be brainstorming or creating an outline just to explore some initial ideas that you may have about it.
Then you actually sit down and create a draft. So you take those ideas that are in your head and you turn them into sentences and paragraphs. And so it starts to come to life, if you will. Then we revise that draft. We try to focus more on the audience and making sure that what we're writing is compelling and that is cohesive and flows in a way that makes sense, logical sense. And then the final step might be something called editing, or sometimes people combine these, revising and editing. But editing is really looking at grammar, punctuation, and some of the mechanics of writing. And then also citations, right? So we want to make sure that we're developing good digital citizens that are not using the work of others without giving proper credit. And also, as you get into high school and college, plagiarism might become an issue. So making sure that you're following a style guide for how you create those citations is really important. So again, it may be, different places might use different terms for the different stages of the writing process, but the important thing to highlight is that it is a process. It's iterative. It's not always linear. So I may develop an idea in pre-writing, and then as I start to develop it, I might change my mind and go back and do some additional brainstorming or change my outline slightly. So that's really important to highlight. Anything else you want to add, Tracy? Or actually, I'll move to the next slide where you talk about Writer's Key.
Thanks. So I'll just illustrate with Writer's Key and reinforce what Luis has said, because I absolutely agree. We have different nomenclature for what it is that we're talking about in terms of the steps, but we're meaning the same thing. So the process that we support is the writing process in Writer's Key, and that whole pre-writing process that Luis was speaking of, we call generate ideas, develop thesis, and gather organize. We've actually broke that down into smaller component parts. So we give students the opportunity from an assignment that they're provided by their teacher, or if they want to write something on their own, to just generate ideas and throw them on that screen so that they can just get them down and kind of take a look at them. And if they want, they can ask their peers and or teacher about those. After they generate their ideas, then they need to think about gathering and organizing information or writing their thesis statement. So both of those parts you'll see in what's outlined in blue there on the screen. Can I point to it there, Luis? Yeah? On the left-hand side? I
can, give me a second. I'm visually impaired, so I have to find my cursor.
There you go. You got it. So this is the section I'm speaking of. And although it looks very linear from generate ideas to develop thesis to gather organize, you could do any of those in an order that works for you. So if the students go to the develop the thesis space, we looked at that a moment ago. There are guiding questions for the students. They can make a response to those guiding questions and create their thesis statement. We also have what we call a gather organize page, and that page is where students can, in doing their research or getting ideas, they can put those into tiles, we call them, or into a traditional outline form, and they can move them around really easily. So again, we're not having to rewrite, but you can just kind of move those around and make a decision as to where they're going to fit for you in the way that you want to tell your story or in the way that you want to lay out your essay. Then drafting is definitely a big part of it. We have actually, in this case, put draft and revise together. If you click different buttons on those pages, you'll get different hints and guidelines as to what you can do with that piece. And then the polish and publish is really what Luis was speaking about in terms of that final editing and getting it ready to rock and roll. And then just to let you know, I totally agree that citations are really important. Around the country, we're all doing citations differently at the middle school level. We don't have a norm at this point, nor do we as adults in our writing. But we provide a space on each page. A student can click a button and a small document will open up, and they can put their references in there, and they will just keep collecting. So that's something that you don't have to all of a sudden do at the end. You can keep collecting along the way if the students get that going.
Great. So there is a question that came in from Linda Wilson. Hi, Linda. So the question is, from research, what are some of the common misconceptions that teachers have about how to develop student writers? And then she has a follow-up question to that. How does use of assistive technology tools like text-to-speech or word prediction impact the learning of the writing process? Is there any good research on this?
Those are
Maybe,
both really
yeah,
good questions.
let's take the first one and see if we have time for the second one.
Okay.
So common misconceptions.
I don't know that they are common. There are a lot of misconceptions out there. There are a lot of misconceptions on the side of us as instructors, and there are a lot of misconceptions on the side of students about where it is that you start and stop and how you use a process. But a lot of misconceptions that teachers have is some of the background knowledge, some of the fluency skills that students might have in producing text for writing. We talked earlier about variability, and that's a huge thing when it comes to some of this. So spelling skills and fluency in spelling, handwriting and or keyboarding skills, and the fluency in being able to do either of those. The more challenging, the more challenges a student has with that fluency, the more difficult it is to actually get a complete sentence or even a complete thought on a piece of paper or in text on a screen, because they are hindered by that fluency, that slow down in the rate in which they can do that. And so that working memory comes into play. And so we think about ways in which we can support that, which kind of moves into your assistive technology question. And that is in some of these earlier stages of writing in the pre-writing process, things to think about making use of might be speech to text tools.
Mm-hmm. And word prediction, especially with that spelling, when spelling is an issue, that word prediction might help. And actually, this is a good time, I think, to bring back up the idea of what's the goal, right? Because I think what you're referring to, Tracy, is that too often we confuse the goal and the means for accomplishing it.
That's absolutely right.
And so depending on the goal, it may be that, they can do a video.
Mm-hmm.
They could do a podcast. So again, just being clear on what the goal is and then kind of separating that from the means for accomplishing it. Now, if writing is the goal, then obviously we need to look at some scaffolds. And that's what a tool like Writer's Key does, provides those scaffolds. And we can do it ourselves using a number of the tools that we're going to mention in the rest of the webinar.
Luis, if I could just say one more thing about some misconceptions,
Yep.
and that is that I think that for many teachers that we've both read about and interacted with in development of the Writer's Key and in studying the Writer's Key, there's a misconception about that goal that Luis was just mentioning. And, is the goal to have perfect spelling, handwriting, and or keyboarding with punctuation and grammar, all the mechanics of writing? Or is the goal for the learner to be able to demonstrate their understanding about a particular topic area or, subject that you've selected for them? And I just really like to encourage people to think about those as two separate goals, or maybe even more than that with all of the different kinds of mechanics that there are in writing. If it's demonstration of understanding and knowledge, then I would really like to encourage you to stop addressing in scoring and providing feedback those mechanical and grammatical kinds of issues in writing. It's tough. And I'm really glad that you brought that up, Louise. I think that's really important.
Yeah, these are difficult questions. It's something that I get at every level that I've taught. That always comes up. And then by the same token, I think often when people start with Universal Design for Learning, maybe not so much anymore, but in the early years, there was a feeling that, everything had to be multimedia. And then they actually took away writing as a choice. And so we want to make sure that writing is a choice as well, because for some students, writing may be a great way for them to organize their thinking. They may be really strong in that area. So making sure that the full spectrum of choices is available is really important. So these are great questions and thoughts that are coming through in the chat. So in the interest of time, we're going to move on. But again, we'll come back at the end and see if we have time to answer some of these tricky questions that are coming up. I love it. So in terms of some of those scaffolds that you can provide learners and that they can use. So in terms of the pre-writing stage, this is where you're sort of collecting information, you're gathering information. And these are a few of the tools that I found to be really helpful. Microsoft OneNote And Leslie's dropping links to these 3 tools in the chat. So that's one way that you can start collecting your bookmarks. So Microsoft OneNote is really helpful. It's available on a number of platforms. And I'm going to date myself right now. For me, I think of Microsoft OneNote as a digital trapper keeper. So if you grew up in the 80s, then you know what a trapper keeper was. It was sort of a notebook where you could organize information into folders. You could, it's colorful, it's very colorful. There are different options for what you could get on the cover of your trapper keeper to make it your own. And so Microsoft OneNote performs a similar function in that it allows you to organize information into what they call notebooks. So it's a note-taking tool from Microsoft. It's free. And I use the OneNote Web Clipper extension. So if you're using Google Chrome, in Google Chrome, you can add extensions. They're like small plugins that then show up in your browser's toolbar. And then they allow you to perform an action on the current web page. So with the OneNote Web Clipper, you can save a bookmark of that page, and it's available from a number of different platforms. What's nice about it is you can also clean up the page as you're saving it. So you can remove a lot of the ads, you can remove the navigation, so that then you're just left with the content to focus attention on. Wakelet, so it's a bookmarking service, and it has support for the Microsoft Immersive Reader text-to-speech support. And then Pocket is another one that I've used. So when I'm surfing the web and I find something, I can save it to Pocket and access it later. And in some versions of Pocket, there are text-to-speech. There is text-to-speech that you can turn on and listen to that article. So again, here we're just trying to, bring those resources, build that background knowledge, which is something that Tracy mentioned, so that when we do sit down to write, we have a pretty good idea of the direction we're going in. Another support is, creating a mind map or an outline, and there's pretty good research support for concept mapping as an activity, as another option for learners to get started, in a more visual way, more conceptual way. And so I've shared with you, and by the way, there is a handout for this webinar. And so in that handout, you'll get links to all of these tools, but you'll notice that most of them have mind in the title, because another way of thinking about concept mapping is mind mapping. One of my favorites here is MindNode. It's available for the iPad and the Mac. And then also Inspiration Maps, which used to be available as software for PCs, but unfortunately it disappeared. It's no longer available, but there is an app called Inspiration Maps. And really what I'm looking for with these tools is the ability to switch back and forth between the concept map and the outline. I found that to be really helpful, to be able to see how things are organized in either way, and being able to either switch back and forth between the two or see them at the same time, which you can do in MindNode. Now, if you're looking for one that has really good support for screen readers, that would be MindNode. That is a challenge with some of these concept mapping applications, is that they don't support screen readers very well. So kudos to MindNode for taking the time to build in screen reader support. So that's definitely worth checking out.
So to kind of continue this thinking about pre-writing supports, to give illustration, in Writer's Key, we have a space in pre-writing to think about just what is it that you want to write about. There, lots of times a topic area will have a lot of directions that you can go in it. So what might you want to do, kind of test out those thoughts and ideas. So you can enter up to 5 ideas, and you can have other people take a look at them and give you some feedback and select the one that you really want to take the time to write and work on in your essay. On the next page, this is what we call gather and organize, rather. And in the gather and organize page, this is kind of what Luis was talking about with different kinds of maps and so forth that students can make. We have tiles, they're called. And it's almost like index cards that we used to use way back in the day of figuring out what were your topic areas, what were your resources and so forth, and sort of moving them around on the page. Here you can do that in the digital environment. You can also select where you believe it's going to fall in relation to the structure of an essay at the introduction, at the body, or in the conclusion, and then that can help you to reorganize it. If using tiles is not your thing, if that does not help your learners in their work or a learner in their work, in writing in English classes in the past with your A's and B's and C's or whatever, but basically following that same notion of getting an idea into a space and then determining where it would fall and what order you might want to place it and what's the logic line and how does that work for you. So the arrows that are on that page are really call outs, we call them, to assist students in an on-demand type of a fashion. The arrow keys that are below each tile can move that tile one direction or another to help the student think about the order in which they want to have them. And as I mentioned previously, there's that feedback option, that little green button toward the bottom, in which students can ask peers and or their teacher for feedback about the order or the information that they have based on the topic that they're going to be writing about. Students all the time throughout the use of this tool have the opportunity to, and you don't see it on this screenshot, but they can see the assignment. So they can open up that assignment and be reminded as to what it is. So again, we're not having to press that working memory. It's right there and available for them if they need to be reminded.
Great. Yeah. And I apologize. My dog apparently likes writing so much that he had to chime in by barking in the background. So if you heard that, my apologies. We'll try to keep him quiet as possible for the rest of the webinar. All right. So once we have an idea, you know, we've built some background knowledge. We have our notes in Writer's Key. We've put together some of those tiles. Then we get to drafting. And I think Linda already mentioned that there are some supports that are available, dictation being one of them. So if keyboarding is an issue, you can use your voice to write. So I love that expression, use your voice, write with your voice, right? And that's becoming much more common now because it's not just essential for some learners, it's a convenience for everybody. We're becoming more used to using our voice as the way that we interact with technology. So dictation is often built into the operating system. So on Windows 10, there is a keyboard shortcut. It's Windows. So there's a Windows key on most PC keyboards. You can press the Windows key and then H, and that will turn on the system-wide dictation feature. On Chromebooks, you can enable it in settings, and then you can use the keyboard shortcut search. So the search key on your Chromebook plus the letter D, and that will also allow you to dictate. And then on the Mac, you can press the function key twice, and that will bring up the dictation. And again, in most cases, you have to go into your settings or your system preferences and enable this feature first before it's available for use. On iOS devices like the iPad and the iPhone, it's actually built into the keyboard. So there's, if you've enabled it in settings, and it should be available by default already, there is a microphone key on the on-screen keyboard. And when you tap that icon, it turns on the microphone and it listens to you. Of course, you want to make sure that you enunciate well and that you're in an environment where there isn't a dog barking in the background. So the quieter the environment is, the better your results will be, along with the enunciation, which brings up a question that it may not always work for everybody. Go ahead, Tracy.
I want to just reinforce the value and the power of dictation for students with disabilities and for students without disabilities. Sometimes that fluency can really get in the way, as I was saying a little bit earlier. And just by saying it out loud, then students can see the text on their page, read it, or have it read aloud to them, and make some revisions if necessary. We have had students who have not participated in writing in any content area actually start generating some text. And to me, this really kind of brings us to that notion of what the goal is again, right? Is the goal for the student to be able to demonstrate some knowledge, to demonstrate some creative thinking and illustrate it in some way. And in this case, perhaps text, but text can be derived from speech. And that's the real power here. So I just want to encourage people to think about that in relation to their goals and making use of dictation like this. Lots of times when we talk about a writing tool, people don't accept the dictation. And I would encourage you to think so, because we're all composing.
That's the key, Tracy. Composing as opposed to just writing, because you can compose in a variety of different ways.
That's right.
And then, so there's dictation built into a lot of operating systems, but it's also available sometimes within an app. And so if you have a recent version of Microsoft Word, it now includes its own dictation feature. It's found in the Home tab of the ribbon. So the ribbon is that part at the top of the screen where all your formatting and other tools are found. If you go to the Home tab in the ribbon, you will find a dictate button if you've updated to the latest versions. And then Google Docs has a feature called voice typing. And so that's under the tools menu. You'll find an option called voice typing. And the great thing is a lot of these features are getting really, really good. My tip is to use an external microphone if you can. And a bonus tip is if you have one of those headphones that come with your iPhone or any other phone, you know, they have a microphone on the headphones, you can cut off the headphones part, and that gives you a really cheap lapel microphone. So just make sure you cut above the microphone, and then, yeah, don't cut up below it. And then you'll end up with a really nice lapel microphone, and you can just tape it to your shirt, and it will pick up the audio a lot better than just the built-in microphone on a lot of devices. So the next screen is going to be a quick video that I'm going to narrate of how to use Google Voice Typing real quick. So in here, I'm just going up to the Tools menu, choosing Voice Typing, and then the microphone. With Google's Voice Typing, I can use big words, comma, such as supercalifragilisticexpialidocious, exclamation mark. How about that? So this is getting better and better all the time. And one of the questions that came up in the chat is, can you use punctuation? And the answer is yes. You can say comma, period, exclamation mark, new line. Depending on the dictation feature, you may also have abilities to, or the capability of editing. So you might be able to say, select typing, change to. So really look at the documentation for the specific dictation feature that you're exploring. And the same thing with word prediction. So it's often built into the operating system, and just about all, you know, a lot of the major operating systems not have it available. Windows 10, it's a little bit difficult to find where to enable this, but I'm going to show you in the next screen with the video where to do that. And then there are apps and extensions that provide even better word prediction. They use advanced algorithms to make the word prediction even more accurate. So a couple of those are Read and Write for Google and Co-Writer, both of which are available as extensions for Google Chrome. So again, an extension is just a plugin that shows up in your browser's toolbar, and then you can use it in the current web page or the current tool that you're working in. So I'm just going to show you real quick with Windows, because it's not what you expect it to be for the word prediction to be enabled. So that's what this video is. The first thing you need to do is go into settings, and you can use the search feature on your Windows 10 device. Just type in settings, and that will take you there. And then go to devices. So select devices, and then typing. Scroll down to the bottom until you find hardware keyboard. And then check the box next to show text suggestions as I type. Then go into Microsoft Office, and as you type, you'll get those predictions above the current word. You can select the suggestions with your mouse, or you can use the keyboard. If you press the up arrow key, it gets you into the suggestions, and then you can use the left or right arrow key to move through the suggestions and pick one by pressing enter. So again, that's just one example. Word prediction is available on a number of different platforms, or available as an add-on with an extension or an app. Here's another example of just one of those extensions. This is, I believe, Read and Write that I have here. And with Read and Write, once you turn on the extension, you can select the option for word prediction. And as you type, you'll see that it shows you the suggestions with a number next to them. You can select the word that you want to enter by using the mouse.
World.
Or you could press Control and the number, and then that will enter it as well. And you should be hearing some feedback as well, so that you make sure that you have the right or the appropriate word. And I do love word prediction for sure. And in Writer's Key, there are some supports built in for drafting as well. So Tracy, would you mind discussing those a little bit?
Sure. So this is the draft revise page that students can use in the way that they want to. We've again taken that writing process and broken it down into component parts, even at the drafting stage, the introduction, the body, and the conclusion. And in each one of those spaces, we have guiding questions to help support students in thinking about what they can be doing in their writing for these component places. Throughout the tool, text-to-speech is available, and in some places, the speech-to-text is available within the tool, and of course, as Louise was just demonstrating, any of those browser functions that, especially with Chromebooks, they're so user-friendly, the speech-to-text can be used.
Yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention with something like dictation, you know, that's a skill. That's a skill that has to be learned over time too. We can't assume that it's going to be really simple for learners to pick it up. So there is a handout for you all that has links to all of these tools. And in the handout, I've also linked to a new section of our website that's not up yet. It's in draft form around writing. That's going to be up real soon because we're updating our website. And I've included a link to a resource that talks about, you know, teaching speech recognition, teaching speech to text from Kelly Key is one of the writers of that tool. But again, how to scaffold the instruction around speech recognition and these other supports. So we're going to move on just in the interest of time, looking at the clock, but I'll make sure we come back to questions at the end. Hopefully we'll have a couple of minutes for that. So revising and peer editing, you know, Google Docs, Microsoft Word Online, they have commenting features, and these make it really easy for learners to provide each other with peer feedback. And then an extension like Read and Write takes it one step further and allows learners to share voice notes. So not only can you do the text comments that are built into Google Docs, but you can also use your voice to leave a comment, or the teacher can provide a comment using their voice. So I'm not sure if some of you have used that and found it helpful, but I certainly make use of the commenting feature quite a bit. It's a great way to do peer editing.
So as an illustration in Writer's Key, I mentioned this previously, we have a feedback area. Students can press a little green button and request feedback of their peers. But what we wanted to do was to help guide the students to get good feedback, to get wise feedback from their peers and or teacher. And so we want them to learn how to ask specific questions. So for each of the areas of writing, we have prompted students to ask specific questions. It's too easy to say, do you like this? And so the students that are being requested to create feedback have a specific question to respond to. And the student requesting feedback actually has a point, has a goal in getting information from their peers. So we have sentence starters to help start off asking for feedback, and we have sentence starters for the responder, that person providing feedback, to respond back to the author. As a student is providing feedback for a peer, they can see the peer's writing on their screen, and they can highlight their peer's writing. They can't edit it, but they can highlight it and then make comments specific to the highlight that they're making. So there's a real goal-oriented and very specific way in which students can help to provide feedback for their peers. And we have had really positive feedback from students and from teachers about this component of the tool. So whether you're doing it online, such as this, or in a classroom where you rotate papers around, to have a method by which you can provide supports for how to ask for and how to provide feedback is really good. And then to help nail in that specificity. We've had teachers explain to us that they've used highlighters, whether it's online or on a piece of paper. And You know, if you're highlighting, if you're giving feedback around mechanics, or if you're giving feedback around the big idea, or if you're giving feedback around something very specific, to use one particular color and then make the comments about that. So we found some very helpful methods, and students have said over and over again that not only as a person receiving feedback have they improved their writing, but as a person reading other people's work and providing feedback, that has helped them in their own writing as well. And this is really showing up in some of our research. So we're very excited about this, and I really encourage people to think about peer-to-peer feedback.
And related to feedback, there's also this notion, and Tracy just mentioned, wise feedback. And there's been some research about how wise feedback helps learners who might be reluctant to, take that feedback and revise their work. How wise feedback makes it more likely that they'll accept the feedback and then make the revisions that are necessary. So wise feedback has three components. One is just a sort of description of what the feedback is, but the second and third components are the really important ones. And it's really sort of reinforcing that there are high standards, that you're using high standards to evaluate the work, and that you have this belief that the learner can live up to those high standards. So we really encourage you to look up wise feedback. There's a number of great resources out there. For educators, this is a really great way to provide feedback that's actionable and that's specific, and that again reinforces in students their own abilities to be good writers. I don't know if you want to say anything else about that, Tracy.
I just can't emphasize enough how wise feedback from teachers to students and training students to provide one another with wise feedback is just really very powerful.
Yep.
Great impact on student work.
And then we get to, again, this is not all linear. You may do this in different orders, but editing is that process where you kind of polish and revise. And I want to highlight a specific tool here. Microsoft Word now has something called the editor. So this takes spell and grammar checking, and it takes it to another level because using artificial intelligence, it can go through a piece of writing and it can look at things like clarity and conciseness. Maybe you use too many words where just, you could tighten things up a little bit, make it more concise. Formality, inclusiveness. So if in the paper you're using the word stewardess, maybe flight attendant would be more inclusive, more gender neutral. Sensitive geopolitical references. So this is all done through artificial intelligence. So it does the spell and grammar checking, but then it adds these additional style checks that it can perform. And for part of that, you do need to have a Microsoft 365 subscription. And some of it is available for free. And an alternative tool that you can use for the grammar and style check is something called Grammarly. And again, links to all of these are not only being shared in the chat, but also available in the handout. So as I said, these things can be called something different. So Tracy in Writer's Key is called Polish and Publish, right?
Right. So we want to get ready for that publication. And so you need to polish it up. And so that means taking a look at some of those mechanics and grammatical kinds of things. Use the text-to-speech that's available within the tool to hear what it is that you have written. To see if it sounds like what you really intended. Quite often when we read our help with that, and that's it. There's a text help company toolbar that's within the tool, and it also does some translation for students. Spell check is a part of the tool. Some of the formatting kinds of things for students to check on. We have hints and guidelines for students to support that formatting, whether it be the paragraph indenting or structure of sentences. What students then polish up and get ready to publish is digitally sent to the teacher, but within the tool, the teacher can look at the students' writing at any point, but this is a step at which the students are saying, I think I'm finished. And then of course there is access to print copies if print is a method by which there's preference for reading and providing feedback to students.
And at this step too, we did a webinar earlier this spring on personalizing the reading experience. And some of those text-to-speech tools might be helpful as well for proofreading. So we encourage you to check out that webinar. It's available for viewing on the AEM Center website. And publishing, this is really the ultimate goal, right? Is to depending on the assignment, depending on what the goal is. I'm a big believer in helping students, connect to the world and have an impact on the world. So to me, publishing beyond just the classroom is really important. When students create something for the teacher, I don't know the exact quote, but Rushton Hurley, who's really well known in ed tech circles, he says when they create for the teacher, they create something that's good enough. When they create for the world, they create something that's good. So the idea that, when you have an authentic audience for your writing, it plays a role in motivating you to do work that raises the bar. And so there's lots of options out there. And some of these have really good support for accessibility. WordPress, Wix, Medium. Medium is actually the AIM Center, or not the AIM Center, but CAS uses Medium to publish a blog. And so, with these tools, you have options for adding alternative text to the images so that they can be described to somebody who uses a screen reader. So that's really, really improving. And then there's book creation tools. So Book Creator, which is available for the iPad and for Chrome. The Pages application on the Mac has some templates now where you can create books in EPUB format. And that's a format that has really good support for accessibility. We have information on that on our website as well. And then with Microsoft Word, there's a plugin called Word to EPUB. And again, that allows you to take a Microsoft Word document and export it into an accessible format called EPUB. And we have lots of information on our website on EPUB, but we really encourage people to create EPUB as opposed to PDF, because PDF can be a difficult experience, especially if you're accessing that writing or that content on a mobile device. So with that, I'm going to open it up to a couple of questions. While you type those into the chat, I just have a few announcements to wrap things up. First of all, we are looking for applications to join the AIM Center as part of our AEM State cohort. This means that you'll get free technical assistance from the AIM Center to help your state build a comprehensive and robust system for providing AIM and accessible technologies. And the application deadline is right around the corner. It's July 1st. You can find full details on our AIM Center website. And then we have a really exciting webinar coming up. And there you can learn about some of the features that Microsoft has created to support not just writing, but reading and math. And then we'll also be joined by an AIM contact from Maryland who will share how those features are being used in her school district. So that's on June 22nd at the same bat time, 3 p.m. Eastern. And then these webinars are, we call them enhanced webinars because in addition to the webinar, we also have office hours. So today at 4:30 p.m. Eastern, you can join us for office hours. You can ask questions. We can do some guided practice if that's what you need to be, feel more comfortable with any of the tools that we mentioned today. And then we have a task for you, or an ask. So I mentioned in the handout, I've linked to a new section of the AIM Center website that we're working on, all about writing. And so right now it's a Google Doc, but your task for this webinar is to go and check that out and then provide us with some feedback. So if there are additional tools that we've missed or any tips that you have, we would really appreciate your feedback on that section that's under development. So that should be out in the next few weeks as we continue to update our website. And with that, I'm gonna open it up and see if there are a couple of questions that we can answer. Maybe Leslie, you can help me track a few of those. I'm gonna have a hard time skipping back up in the chat here.
I know, I'm scrolling up as well. Most of them are from me, just a lot of stuff.
But if there is a question or two that we can address to either me or Tracy. Otherwise, you can also come to the office hours. So that will be your encouragement to come to the office hours this afternoon. And we'll be happy to answer those questions in a more detailed and supportive way. And then I also want to just wrap up by saying a big thank you to Tracy for sharing her expertise today and all the excellent work that she has done with her team on creating a really nice tool in Writer's Key. And I hope you've gotten some insights about the application of UDL to the writing process from the ongoing work on developing Writer's Key. And I also want to thank, as always, Leslie for monitoring the chat and sharing all those links for you all, and Brooke from ACS Captioning Services for providing the captions so that we can make sure that this webinar is accessible to as many people as possible. So we really appreciate that. The last reminder is there is a survey. We really take your feedback seriously. And so there is a survey that Leslie has dropped the link into the chat. We appreciate it. It'll take you about a minute or two. You can fill out that survey and it will really help us with future webinars, or recommend topics that you would like us to see us take on. You can always get in touch with us at any time. You can email us. We're at aem@cas.org. Tracy is at thall@cas.org. I'm at lperez@cas.org. See a theme there. And of course, you can follow us on social media. That's another way to connect with us. So if there are no further questions, or if you don't get a chance to ask them now, definitely come to our office hours at 4:30, and we'll be happy to go through anything with you, any tools or any guided practice, or answer any questions. Other than that, I will sign off, and thank you all so much for joining us this afternoon, and thank you for your excellent questions that you brought up in the chat. We really appreciate the conversation and the thinking.
Thank you.